what and who Word of Life is, briefly.
Okay. The basis of Word of Life, my father bought Word of Life distributors back in '79, and back then he distributed or imported Catholic material, books, videos, records even, and he distributed those to Christian bookshops in Australia. And during the process of running that company, mainly sort of during the mid-80s, he found that people were searching far and wide for new music for their churches. And they were getting that music, but instead of having to buy, a number of copies for musicians or that sort of thing, or buy a heap of hymn books, they were photocopying and putting pages on pews and going that way. And my father, being the person he was, he only looked after about 40 publishers back then, and put a suggestion, I guess, to those particular publishers and said, look, this is what's happening in churches in Australia. We'd like to be able to try and protect that if we possibly can, and introduce some sort of a blanketing licensing system to accommodate the church where they're at, but then be able to pay you a royalty for that accommodation. The answer took a little while for these publishers to come around because they were scared about sales and things like that. So he basically used at the moment, people are saying, pleading ignorant and saying, oh, we didn't know, and reproducing it anyway, in which case you get no royalty. If we give them an easy way or an easy road to walk along, and we hand it to them on a spoon and say, this is the best way for you to go, advertise it, you're going to get something back. Previously, we're getting nothing. When they saw the dollar signs, they went, yeah, okay, yeah, sure, that'd be good, that would really help. And so that's when Word of Life International became a subsidiary of Word of Life Distributors, and they continued two relatively well, I suppose they were linked, but two businesses on two different roads. And back in 1990, my dad approached me and said, are you interested in this? I was a musician, it was sort of really right up my alley. I sort of, understood where he was coming from. And so I took a really sort of backseat role, if you like. And then in 2000, my dad said to me, fair enough, I don't want to do this anymore. You've done it for long enough. Why don't you take it over, and I'm going to go and play golf. And hence that's what he did. So he kept in touch with me once a week, and I ran the show from there. And being a musician, being a composer, and a writer, I know that sort of side of the coin, but also acting on behalf of people that want to use other people's music, I understand that side of the coin as well. So to try and meld the two together and simplify things down to an absolute bare minimum so that it's not hard for people to understand is where my, I suppose, not talent, but passion lies, I suppose. Copyright, I don't want to take anything away from what Fiona said, or Malcolm for that matter, but in my mind, copyright is a really, really simple thing. It either is or it isn't. That's it. End of story. You either have permission to reproduce or you don't. If you don't have permission to reproduce, then it's going to be stolen. If you've got permission, then you can go ahead and reproduce. It's as simple as that, in my mind. I know there's always going to be greys, there's always going to be people reading between the lines, there's always going to be this, that and the other, but predominantly if we can get into our minds that we need permission before we reproduce, then the next step after that is to ring the agency that you get the licensing through and get the information either mailed out to you, emailed to you, rather than having a phone conversation and then having to go back and report to other people in your congregation or your music group or whatever. This is what I heard, or this is what somebody told me. If you've got it down in writing, let them read it. Let them read it 100 times until it settles into their head. At least the weight's off your shoulders. You've asked the questions, you've got the answers in writing, and it's up to them then.
Thank you.
Sorry, that was brief.
That was simple. My Word of Life provides many licenses, but two of the licenses are annual restricted copyright license and the music copy license.
Full music copy
Thank you. Full music copy licence. Yep. Can you explain the difference between these two licences?
Yep. The main difference between these two licences is the word restricted. The first one is annual restricted copyright licence, which means you're restricted to just reproducing the words and melody line for your congregation. That's it. Nothing more, nothing less. That's it. Restricted to reproducing words and melody line. The full music licence is full score music, so that includes guitar chords, melody line, bass lines, parts for other instruments, vocal, harmony, all that sort of stuff. That's all it entails. It doesn't. It only. Sorry, I should say that only caters for musicians, not your congregation. So one is for a congregation, which allows you to reproduce words and melody. The other is for your musician or your choir member.
Thanks for that, Mark. And we might come back to that a little bit later. But does Word of Life cover the copying of recorded music for musicians? For example, I work in Catholic education, and often schools will say to me, they ask about copyright, and I say, I don't know anything. Remark.
Good answer.
Yeah. But they'll often say, oh, we want to, take all the music, and we're going to have a mass, or for a parish, it might be a parish celebration, and we want to put all the music onto one CD and give it to everyone to learn. What are your thoughts on that?
Big fat no. We deal in print, and that's moved into projection. We haven't got into recording because it's really not where our passion lies, if you like, or where we're really equipped at this time. I think, and I might be out of school when I say this, but hopefully Fiona will be able to put me on the right track, and I'll ask you to do that if I'm wrong. But I understand that in a lot of churches, with the dwindling amount of churches and the parish priests and everything like that, and the merger of so many churches, organists are also depleting as well. So to have recorded music to sing to is always going to be a really, really good thing. It's difficult if you've got all these CDs that you can play. That's great. Somebody's got to be there ejecting the CD, finding the song on the next one, putting it in, getting ready to play for that particular song. If they were able to download those songs, put it onto an iPod that is owned by the church, the parish priest could from up at the altar press the button if he wanted to for the next thing, because it would be graded in the order of the service. So all it would be with the music would start, press of a button, and the job would be right. But we don't cover that at the moment because it's not what we do. We don't cover it for schools, we don't cover it for churches, and it's really not something we've had the manpower to investigate.
Thanks, Mark. Just coming back to that, those two different types of licences. If I was in a school and I had only the annual restricted copyright licence, and I had a parent, or I could be in a parish, and I had a parent come in to play the music, can I still photocopy that sheet music for them to use, or would they have to seek a licence to get it from somewhere else, or can I do it under the parish licence?
You're talking about sheet music only? And does the church itself have a full music licence to be able to reproduce the music? If it's being held in the church grounds, the service? Yes. Yep, then yes. Because it's being held in the church itself, not in the school grounds. Regardless of who is using the church actually holds the licence, and so it's grounded to that premises.
And
so
the church would record that?
The church would record that.
What about for lyrics and sheet music? If I'm in a school and my parish has a licence, can I then copyright under the parish licence? If I'm, say, a school teacher, and my parish has a Word of Life licence, both licences, but my school doesn't, can I photocopy music or put lyrics up on a PowerPoint under the parish's licence?
Yes, yeah, you can, because again, it's under the church's premises. It's not happening at the school. So normally if the school would have a service, let's say their saint of their school, and they have a service at the school, and they need to reproduce material for that particular service. Normally outsiders would be involved in that service, parents, relatives, friends would come along, in which case the school licence that it had wouldn't cater for that purpose. Number one, because it wasn't held on their school grounds. Number two, it would be a public situation which the school wouldn't be able to use the statutory licence that they have through AMPOS for that. What's that?
The statutory one's the Cal licence.
Oh, is it?
Because it's a voluntary licence.
Okay, beg your pardon. The licence that the school has through AMPOS wouldn't cater for that purpose because it's public, in which case our licence would cater for that. But as a grounding as well, that's being held in the church. So the church licence could be used for that particular purpose. Because it would be classed as part of the church's normal operation, if you like.
So therefore the piece would need to be recorded in the church?
Yes, it would.
Yeah, that's what I've been asking.
But if they were to use it for practice in the school, prior to coming to the church...
They wouldn't use our licence.
No, thank you.
They would need a school licence, is that right?
Well, not for us. Not with us, because our licence only covers public worship. We need to make that for schools. All right? Anything that's classed as educational, that's not us.
Can I ask then, Mark, why would a school have a Word of Life licence?
The school would have a Word of Life licence because they would invite outsiders in which case it would be more than an educational purpose or situation. As soon as the school invites somebody else that's not associated with the school into the school, it becomes public then, and not educational anymore. In which case, they need to have some sort of licensing to be able to accommodate that. And primarily, a lot of Catholic schools, or a lot of private schools, will have a service at the various times of the year, and they'll need that accommodation if they're able to, or if they want to, invite outsiders in to provide their invitation.
So we need can I just confirm, my school is not on the same site as the church.
Yes.
Does their Word of Life licence cover our school on a different site when it is a worship, even though it is in a hall because we don't have a church on site?
No.
So because we're disadvantaged in a way that we don't have a church on site, we then would have to have a Word of Life licence?
Yes.
Thank you.
I was just going to say, when you're making the distinction between bringing the public in or just having the school, is it only if the public access the material? So if the school was...
If the school is...
a copy of the lyrics and the
That's right.
but if they weren't, in those instances,
Then what licence wouldn't have anything to do with it. Yeah.
you have to test another license.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Can we repeat that be repeated?
I was just asking the question about if a school invited the public, like parents and friends, in for, say, a service. I was just trying to work out whether it's only covered by the Word of Life licence if the public themselves receive a copy of the lyrics or the music, or if it was just the students themselves that were performing as part of a service. Mark was just saying then the Word of Life licence wouldn't apply, and just the school's AMPOS or CAL licences would apply.
Because it's normally that wouldn't be the case because the school would be encouraging those outsiders to participate in that. They'd be given an order of service. They'd be encouraged to sing if they were viewing an overhead or a projection. So that occurrence could easily happen, but it wouldn't be the norm, let's say, for a school.
As a catechist, as well as not as a church, as a catechist in a state school, sometimes you have a combined church service of the children. Sometimes we go to different churches, Anglican, Catholic. Now, usually we go to the church. So what we sing in that little service would be covered by the church licence.
Yes, it would.
Yes. But if at the last minute it decided to pour buckets and the kids couldn't go, it would have to be held in the church hall. Now, it's very much a last minute.
All right, is the church hall down the street or is it on the same grounds?
Sorry, it's the school hall. The school hall will be at the school grounds.
The school would then have to have a licence to be able to accommodate that, in which case you could get around it by getting a one-time use licence for that one occasion.
See, it's the last minute.
Thanks everyone. Mark, that's quite enlightening for me because I was always under the impression that schools had to record if they had a school mass in the parish church on the same grounds. That when I worked in schools, used to record everything under my school licence, for those masses. Is that okay to do that, or should it be recorded under the parish licence?
Just needs to be recorded. Someone has to tell us about it. Whether it's on a school licence or whether it's on the church's one, I'm not too fussed. It just needs to be recorded back to us so that we can pay a royalty for that reproduction. Okay.
Thanks, Mike. And we might field more questions if people, I know I can see people's heads spinning there, so.
If you did use the church's licence, though, licence number on your reproduced material, then it must be recorded by that church. All right. Let's make that clear.
Thanks, Mike.
And Christmas masses in school grounds, because the church is not large enough, do you have to get a one-only licence for that?
Really depends what you're reproducing. A lot of Christmas carols are in the public domain, and so therefore there's really no licensing needed for Christmas carols wording if you're giving out that into a book of February. Like for a silent night or something like that, you're just putting a lyric in.
Yeah, even Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer is in February.
Can you just take the microphone?
Isn't it?
And just address something?
I was just going to say, Mark's right about Silent Night and those traditional carols are out of copyright or traditional PD. But even songs like Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, Santa Claus is coming to town. Most schools have a mixture of traditional and more contemporary songs. And if you're reproducing words that are in copyright, you need permission to do that. If it's going to the parents, if it's just going to the public, if it's just going to the school students, well then it can come under their school licenses. But once the public's involved, it's outside.
Thank you. I'll just move on now. We're just saving other questions for this afternoon. Mark, annual licence holders are required to keep records of their copying so that you can pay the appropriate remuneration to composers whose music is used the most. One of our participants has this question. I am responsible for copyright in my parish, and I have 9 choirs and music groups to coordinate. Tracking usage is a nightmare. Is there an easy way? Have you got some suggestions that you may have heard over the years from people who have contacted you about the best effective ways to record and track the music that's used in either the parish or the school setting?
I've got plenty of suggestions, but it may not necessarily suit that particular church. What I would suggest to this particular person is to find out what is the easiest, most cost-effective way of being able to keep your musicians involved in this, but get them to play a part. I said to a lady, where she is, earlier today, that a really simple cost-effective way is to bolt a 97-cent, 64-page exercise book to the organ with a pen. Rule it up at the same sort of table as our survey form and get the person, now that we don't have to take care of mass parts, just the lyric as such anymore, it's only going to be a number of songs that they have to write down, and composer name, publisher name, and however many people were in the congregation at the time. That sounds pretty easy to me. Now, if you were to do it on a weekly basis and have someone be able to facilitate that, then, or make it their baby, that would work. I've heard of churches putting in a whiteboard and doing the same thing. Some churches have even gone to a blackboard and put in the same sort of thing, make sure it's taken in chalk, and it doesn't. There's other more computer-savvy people, musician-wise, secretary-wise, whatever you want, that will keep an Excel spreadsheet together, and they simply provide a piece of paper every Sunday morning, or whatever the case, just write down their bit of stuff, goes back to the office, the secretary on a Monday morning, or whoever's baby it is, put that information into the database, we keep a record that way. It's not very hard. If this person's got 9 choirs to coordinate, God help them.
Where is that?
Okay, alright, so it's actually a reality, fantastic. I'll tell you that if you're good at delegating This is right up your alley. If you're not, get good at delegating. Because if you allow people to have, it's like teaching a child, right? If you want a child to do something, let them have it. Give them the ownership of it. Allow them to take some participation in it, and more often than not, they will be able to accommodate.
Why? Can I just ask a question? Like for you, like I give pieces of paper, I bolted it virtually to the organ
Yep, great.
as far as I can.
Mm-hmm.
But I still come in on Monday morning and I might have 1 or 2 masses I have to go through their slides and whatever, and also they account for it each week. Whereas if I have a CCLI license, I give them a list of songs. I don't have to head count every week.
Mm-hmm. I hear what you're saying there. I'm not too sure how CCLI keep their record keeping, but I know that the way that we do ours is on an actual basis. We don't use any sampling or anything like that because we just don't believe that it's an accurate way of doing our job. So we ask for an actual copy amount or as close as we possibly can to that information. I understand that it's a little bit harder, but for our job to then pay the composer, we believe that we're then doing the best job that we can in that regard.
Sorry, but with huge respect, I'm a composer, and for you to actually tell somebody to bolt an exercise book to an organ, I take great offence because huge error occurs, and you're talking about my material that's, that may or may not be recorded. I'm sorry, but I find that hugely offensive.
What is it, Gina? Is it the exercise book being bolted to the organ? Is that, I don't know what you're
just
saying.
the flippant remark that, Mark, that somebody should bolt something to an organ and hope to God that people will record properly. I mean, blackboards get rubbed out, exercise books get mislaid, and recording is the only way that a company like yours can pay me, who created the work in the first place.
We do have a recording program that gets loaded onto a computer and records can be kept that way. It's only just how can I put it? An easy way, a cost-effective way of being able to allow those musicians to write down that week's material. It then is up to the church to keep proper records from them. Bolting the exercise book to the organ is just so that the book doesn't get lost. The person who is keeping those records is supposed to look at that book each week, so that those records themselves are recorded somewhere else.
I think the message that we're really getting here is that under any license, or Word of Life license, there's the obligation to be recording this and submitting it. So I think that, when you do read those terms, that it's clearly there. And really, the copyright is about ensuring that these composers can continue to compose. Because the fact of the matter is that, most of the Australian composers are doing it for the love of it. And it's costing a lot of money for those composers to record and publish all that they publish. And I know from, my personal experience that I'm quite happy and take great joy in parishes and schools using all my music, but I need a bit of help too, some support to do that. And I think that's why people need to be recording this stuff for those composers that are out there, really giving you the material that you need for quality liturgies and quality worship in your assemblies. So I think most parishes have got clever, creative people there who can find a good way to do it. But Mark, I just want to ask you one more question about that. What would you say to a parish or school who uses the same records each year? Because it's just a bit too hard to try and work out each year.
If churches are doing that, when they get to those gigs, they'll have a few things to answer for, I guess. But in my mind, that's really not doing what they've been asked to do. They're not abiding by the licensing. They may be paying the money, but then they're not doing the other sort of half of it. To be able to police that is just way, way too hard. We don't have the facilities, nor the people, nor anything to be able to do anything about that. We're actually relying on people's goodwill, their Christ, coming from a Christ perspective. I mean, I did say to one lady earlier today that, if we really were to take the two things that Jesus left us to heart, we wouldn't be having this discussion. All right, because we wouldn't want to be trying to hurt anybody else, or we wouldn't be acting in a way that we wouldn't be, we would like ourselves, if you like.
Can you tell us, I'm just not sure who works for Word of Life, if it's just yourself, or whether you are employing other people to...
Three people.
3 people, and what do the other 2 people... Well, can you tell me what you do, how that works, please?
One lady keeps the money side of things. She's only in 1 day a week. I have another lady that does a little bit of record keeping, but I pretty much do the rest.
Okay, so with the money that comes in, is there any thought to employing people to do the follow-up? Some of these things that we're talking about, as you say, need huge follow-up, and I just wonder what happens in that gap.
All right. If we were to look at the big picture, and we would see that in today's Catholic or conservative type church, I suppose, to a degree, we're running out of priests, we're merging churches, we're closing churches, cancelling licences. If the money was there, we would be doing more, but the money is not there. So the key comes down to, if the money isn't there, you can't put into anything else. Now, if you look at any of our stuff, we keep our admin costs to absolute minimum. We have nothing printed, not a thing. Everything goes through this photocopier, every single thing. We stamp our own envelopes, we don't get anything printed, nothing. So all of our admin costs are bare minimum, so that we can then pass on the rest of the money to the composer themselves. So if there was money, I mean, I was saying to Jan yesterday that a few years ago we had this thought of being able to develop a DVD, and then it would get loaded onto the CD that we send out with all the song titles on it. And to be able to accommodate that, we haven't looked into that because there's been no way of being able to sort of accommodate that, the way things are, the situation as it is. But I believe that if we were able to do that, then you could sit down with somebody and watch that DVD for, I don't know, half an hour, which would explain the basics of what copyright's about, what's expected of the church, to accommodate with the licenses, because it appears that even though we send out the paraphernalia that goes with the license, people don't read it, because it's very plain. There's only one A4 page that explains the terms, and it's pretty simple language if people would take the time to read.
Now, I think this has been quite good in terms of seeing the big need out there in reporting, and I think it's been an issue for people for some time. And I think it's really good, Mark, for you, you're probably aware of that anyway, but to have heard that and look at options for Word of Life in the future. For example, have you got any plans for any online recording at all?
If we were to keep records, get people to put their records online, like CCLI do, we would have to most likely employ somebody to keep checking of all of that stuff. And we only ask you to put in your information once a year, so that we don't have to have that extra time put into that area. We're assuming, I guess, that the information that's coming in is correct information, not previously copied from some other year or something like that. We believe, and are giving people a genuine opportunity so that we can trust them that they're doing the right thing that we're asking them to do. In the future, I can't see that we would be able to accommodate that, and to my mind, neither would I want to. To pressure people into doing something on a weekly basis when we're dealing with volunteers in most churches that keep these records, it just starts to press the button with people if you're nagging them the whole time, and they're voluntarily giving their time to keep these records. If you allow them that extra time, I mean, I get plenty of licence holders that ring up and say, listen, I can't get in by this date, by the date that it's due, can I have some extra time? You absolutely can. Please get it in though as soon as you can. And people are really thankful for that extra time. But if it had to be done on a weekly basis, when people, I mean, there's some ladies that I spoke to here today and they do it on a monthly basis, because that suits them. If we would make the terms so rigid, then I think it wouldn't work very well.
Monica?
I just wanted to say, we have road rules that we have to follow, and if we don't follow the rules, we get accidents or, things happen. I actually think that any licensing agency has a duty and a responsibility. I mean, you wouldn't have business if it wasn't for the publishers that you represent, right? Word of Life is about selling, one of the commercial word, selling a license. In our experience, and we do a lot of workshops with schools and parishes, most people want to do the right thing. Most people want to actually, most people want to do the right thing, and they do try to do the right thing. But in our experience, there are composers in this room that have never received any money on Word of Life. So to me, that's a real, or like a loaf of bread and, a few bottles of milk worth of income. That to me sends a very strong message that there's an intrinsic problem with the reporting. So to me, I think there's a duty of care incumbent on you and AMCOS and CCLI and everybody else to make sure that you are selling a licence, that people comply with those rules. That's just my personal view. Because it's real people on the end that are not getting paid and shouldn't.
Can you give me a suggestion how we might be able to listen?
Well, I think, Mark, I think you have a duty of care to have either have staff on board that can say, St Mary's Parish, I haven't received your licence this week, or are you doing the correct thing? Because clearly, when I go around to parishes, they say, oh, it's too hard, it's time consuming, we're all volunteers, which is what you self-admitted. I don't know, there needs to be some sort of forum where collectively we can work out a way so that the real justice issue of correct reporting is addressed. Because the composers are losing out big time.
Do you have any suggestions?
I suggest we have a conversation about it. We collectively have a conversation about it.
In my mind, I suppose we've been in this industry for about 18 years, and I have only had a conversation with maybe one or two composers that have not complained, but simply asked the question as to, well, my stuff's being used, where's my payment? And I'm saying, well, okay. If you're out there doing that stuff, then you owe it to yourself to actually put some of that out there into your program or your workshop. And I know that a couple of composers that do the rounds of this country have done that. So I can see that they're doing their best to try and educate people, but they're mostly going into schools. They are going into churches, but mostly into schools, so it's okay. From my point of view, we do send out letters when we don't receive the report. And it is written on our invoices that we send out that they must send the reporting. If people are reproducing stuff that they shouldn't be reproducing, then a letter goes out. But they need to look at what it is that they're reproducing. They need to rehash their church repertoire because the songs that they're reproducing aren't covered or whatever the case may be. From behind the desk, I suppose there's only a minimal amount that I can really do monitoring and trying to police that sort of thing. But I would prefer to take the road that is a more positive one, and that is that where I do have a conversation with someone who is a little bit conscientious about doing the right thing, that I try and encourage them to express that to other people in their parish, and try and be that focal point for that particular parish, that if people do have questions or queries or whatever, that they go to that person and then that person gets in contact with me if they can't work it out themselves. The biggest issue with a lot of this sort of stuff, I believe, is I spoke to you about this yesterday. The parish priests, and this is in no way finger pointing to anybody, but don't have a lot of idea about what their church is doing. The music ministry don't have a lot of idea about what it is they're doing. The secretary of the church, which predominantly is a woman usually, is the one that I speak to most. And they're the ones that are like, this doesn't seem right. Is it right? And so I go through a phone call talking to them about copyright. Whereas it really actually should be coming from the musicians themselves, playing the music. Are we allowed to do this or aren't we allowed to do this? If we are, then what are we doing about keeping the records? Because we're obliged to do that. The licence terms ask us to do that. If we've read it, and predominantly it comes back to that. So if we were to try and stay on the positive rather than pointing at the negative and try and accommodate people and make it easy for them like we tried to do at the start of this whole thing 18 years ago, if you make it easier for people, people are more than ready to accommodate more times than
I think that the reason most of us are here today is to get a bit of an education in copyright as parish musicians or people responsible in a parish or a school for recording that copyright. So I think education is a very, very big issue for Word of Life, and it's something that needs to be looked at. But we kind of need to draw this to a close. We have got the panel this afternoon, but I think that there's a lot of challenges there for us in terms of copyright. And we've heard a great deal from Mark today answering many of your questions that you put up for us. And I know, again, even after Fiona and Malcolm's presentation, it raises more questions than it actually answers. So we are going to move into a panel this afternoon to do that. But Mark, I'd just like to thank you for coming up here. It's not an easy thing to do, to have all those questions fired at you like that. But Mark was happy to do that for everyone and be as transparent as he could be in answering all your questions regarding Word of Life. And we would just want to say thank you, Mark, for that. We're very grateful.